This is Arts Alive. I'm Lynda Phillippi. My guest today is Steve Long, and Steve's here to talk about Terroir, the Creative Writing Festival, and also about some of the work that he's currently doing. So, welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Lynda.
It's always a pleasure to have you.
Well, it's fun to be here.
You're one of my favorite guests.
Great, thank you.
Anyway, so let's talk. Terroir's coming up rather quickly.
It is April 19th,
Okay.
and that's a Saturday, and 9 to 5:30 are the times.
And that will be at Chemeketa.
It's at Chemeketa again, which proved to be a wonderful venue.
I thought so.
Yeah,
Really nice.
it was really the perfect place.
Really nice.
Yeah.
And because Chemeketa is also filled with really great art, local art.
I was surprised to see that, but it's pleasing. It's good to be there.
Yeah, they did a wonderful job with that.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about you and
Okay.
kind of refresh the browser for people who may not be as familiar with you as some of the rest of us. So, you want to talk about some of the things you've done?
Well, this is, I was with Terroir from the beginning. Barbara Drake and Emily Chadwick started it. And once they got together, they asked me if I'd like to participate, and it was an honor. This is the 4th year. And so for the first couple of years, I just helped move stuff, helped organize. The last 2 years, this being the second one, I'm a presenter. So last year I did a thing on crowdsource funding, which was a popular topic. People are interested in that.
Yeah.
And now this year I'm going to do creating dynamic characters in fiction.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
So, and along with that, or the impetus for that, was my book, There's a Somebody.
Okay.
Yeah. And
And I know that you did this show earlier, and you talked about actually the fact that you kind of switched voices.
well, it was voice. The most significant thing was shifting point of view. So I went from what's called third-person shifting to first-person. And it's interesting. There's a lot to say about that if you're a geeky writer type. And that is, there's all these choices to make. And I think it influences the end product. And in some circles, I've been criticized because people read an earlier draft. I think the purpose of a book, or at least what I'm trying to do, is entertain. This isn't a treatise on history or something. It's to be entertaining. And
You're telling a story.
it's a story, and it's the kind of thing that interests me. I mean, I lay in bed at night, and that's before I go to sleep, I read. And that's my audience. That's who I'm thinking about when I write. And I may have said, the greatest compliment I could get is if somebody said, gee, I stayed awake too late because I had to read one more chapter.
Of course.
So that's
right.
what I'm looking for.
All right.
But when I made the switch to first person, I just felt two things happen. I thought it was more fun to read. But I thought also that the story, by definition, is about the protagonist. And I thought that he was lost in third person and sort of came alive in first person. And he does things that are, to say that they're unconscionable is probably an exaggeration, but they're what most of us wouldn't do. He acts in a selfish way, but when you see the world through his eyes, my hope is that you sort of understand at least what he thinks he's doing.
Right.
And I thought that was lost in third person. And I have to say that my model for that was Nick Hornby's High Fidelity, which is in first person. In fact, it's first person present tense, which is what I shifted to. And I think it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great. And so for you, working this process in terms of how do you really tell your story and create that, I mean, the character was always there, but it's a matter of you had a clear sense of the character, but how to best present the character and his story in a way, and I think you're right. Coming from a third person, your character, your protagonist, it's easy to sort of pass judgment. You
Sure.
know, ugh, what's he thinking? You know, that sort of thing. But when somebody's telling you the story in their own words, they're usually a lot more sympathetic as a character because you're getting, you know, you're getting the motivation behind their actions as well.
Particularly right. I mean, there's other ways to do it, but in first person, you can get the internal dialogue. So he may say something, but then he thinks about what he said. In third person, you're really not going to get that. And I think it's so fascinating, the responses that I've gotten. Everywhere from a fellow approached me, and he was so upset he was shaking.
Oh.
And he said, I have never hated a protagonist
no.
like I hate your guy.
Okay.
Now, which is terrific. I love that response because he didn't hate the book. He didn't like the protagonist. And I think to be able to evoke a strong response like that is a compliment.
That sounds like some of the conversations we have at my book club.
Yes, sure.
I really hated that guy. Oh, God, he was horrible.
How wonderful for the author.
Right, he did a good job.
Now, on the other hand, I've gotten, and I guess I can say this on air, one of my brothers read this and said, oh, I thought he was fine. Now, what does that say about my brother? Or at least his take on the world?
Moral relativity.
Absolutely.
It's always about those shifting sands, depending on where you happen to be standing in the moment.
Sure. And originally, I thought that the genre or the subgenre is a male confessional. And so, having heard that title, I kind of thought, well, you know, maybe guys will like it and women won't, which is a dumb marketing move because most book,
Really dumb.
most book buyers are women. Nevertheless, it's I had written this thing and I liked it, and so I felt like I wanted to present this. What I found was a pretty even split. And all the way from, I had a woman say that she thanked me for writing the book. She said, I think I now understand my son better.
There you go.
That was one thing.
I would say that's, yeah.
All the way to another man, this was a younger man, said, I wanted to reach into the page and strangle him. So opposite, gender-wise, those were opposite reactions of what I expected. But again, I didn't write it to be provocative, but it kind of turned out like that.
Well, that's okay because that's who the character turned out to be.
Sure.
You know, those kind of actions, that kind of a situation, I mean, you know, it's going to elicit some strong feelings, I think.
Sure.
Everybody's kind of got an opinion about what needs to happen in you know, those volatile relationships and families. And
my mentor, my teacher, Elizabeth George, when she read it, she said, well, you've certainly dug him a deep hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the ending is, I think, inconclusive, which is exactly what I was looking for. I had dinner with friends the other night and who had read the book, and the fellow said, you must have known when you started, you must have known the ending. And I guess to an extent I did. Mostly what I knew was I didn't want it wrapped up neatly.
Tied with a bow, and
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, what are you working on in the moment at present?
Well, I don't know that it's a sequel. The second book, actually, I've done a couple of drafts, and so it's by and large finished.
Oh.
The protagonist for that is a minor character in the first book.
I think I remember that you saying you were going to kind of pick up a thread.
And it is
work
a thread.
it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and the presentation is different.
Okay.
This is third person. And I actually made a shift there. I had originally written it in omniscient, which is a little unwieldy, but some of my favorite books are written in that same omniscient, and that is Lonesome Dove, Nobody's Fool by Richard Rousseau. And it's kind of undisciplined. I mean, if you really do omniscient, like at least I was taught, you have to really hold the reins and be very...
And you have to be fair. One guy
Exactly.
can't get all the good lines. I mean, you know, I mean, everybody's got to have their own turn.
There's that, and there's, you can't cheat the reader. If you're in Joe's head on this page, and if Joe has a thought on the next page, then it's not fair to not have him comment on something, or at least think about something. And these two books that I mentioned aren't like that. They sort of break the rules, or at least as I learn the rules. Nevertheless, I go back to the same thing. They're entertaining.
Right,
They're
exactly.
just fun to read.
So we'll shift a little bit to terroir because we don't have a vast amount of time,
Sure.
interestingly enough. But so how do you present that when you're doing a workshop? Do you have people sort of do an exercise, like a writing exercise, or are you more presenting concepts?
I'm working on my presentation now.
Oh, okay.
And it's not going to be a workshop as much, but I do want it to be interactive. And there's sort of a step-by-step, and this sounds so mechanical, and it really isn't, but at least a procedure, an approach. And I want to throw out something, an example of something, an anecdote that helps define the character.
Sort of illustrates the point you're making.
And then get some feedback. I want to have the audience think of an anecdote or a characteristic or something that helps define this character. And in a character-driven work, which this is, and which is one approach to writing a book, there can be plot-driven, but I prefer character-driven. The motivation or the forward movement really comes from the character, obviously. And so you have to really know that person, and this is a way to develop and round out this character so that you know when the chips are down, what motivates them, which way are they going to jump based on their needs, and it's called a pathological maneuver. What is their pathological maneuver? And once you determine that, then you can kind of go to the next step, but you've got the core. It's like the little battery pack. You know, that's what's going to push this story forward, and that's what I want to talk about.
Right, because the plot, a lot of times, I mean, you know, in art as in life, the plot unfolds as you or me, as we make the decisions that we make, and then there's a consequence that follows from that action, and that's the plot. That's your life.
Sure. And you know, there's the term slice of life, and that's sort of where I fall. If you were writing a mystery, there are kind of guidelines and things that you have to do. But again, I go back to Elizabeth, and she has said after she writes the first draft, she'll come back and look for half a dozen clues that send the reader, or at least the reader anticipates going in a certain direction. And she'll change that just to keep you on your toes.
So it doesn't seem so plottingly obvious.
Exactly.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So that you know ahead of time. And she's done great.
Well, I want
right.
you to give this information one more time.
Okay. So this is the Terroir Creative Writing Festival. It's going to be April 19th. This is a Saturday. You really need to pre-register. And not that you can't show up at the door, but if you want to order a lunch, you need to do that ahead of time. It also gives you kind of a first pick on maybe a more popular presentation.
Sure, of course.
There are simultaneous presentations, and you can't be at everything. So
You have to make some choices.
Right.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. I
Okay.
am really looking forward to your workshop.
Good.
And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.